thank you so much for dedicating your time out of your schedule today to be with us. Can you please give us your full name and your profession?
Well, it's my pleasure to be interviewed today on this subject that I care a lot about. My name is Anh Thu. My profession, I work for a government contractor in financial.
So can you please tell me about the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and when was the foundation established, and what is the mission of the foundation?
The memorial was established, the foundation was established in 1993 through a congressional act that was signed into law by President Clinton at the time. From 93 to 99, the foundation tried to raise money and stuff like that. At that time, there was no memorial, there was no, land or park or anything yet, but they wanted to have a memorial, so they tried to do fundraising. They hired a PR firm, but that didn't work. So in 2003, through an article in the paper, someone saw it and contacted me and asked me, like, can you contact them and see whether we can be a part of it? So once I contacted them, it was in November of 2002, they were so happy because they tried to contact the Vietnamese community, but they never been able to. And so we had a fundraising right that Christmas. It was in December of 2002, and we raised $35,000 that we handed to them right then and there. With that kind of funding, they were able to try to tell the government that, look, that we got this kind of funding. The Park Service need to allocate a park for us. So they allocated a park down that way, very near Capitol Hill. And I went there and I testified for the city and all kind of things. But in the end, they were like, oh, that piece of land is too nice. We want to keep it for us, for the U.S. government. Communism is not anything that America has experience with, so we want to give you something else. So we fought for it, and we got this piece of land, which, if you look down that way, you see, the Capitol Hill, and that's what we wanted. So from 2003, that's how I got involved, and I was asked to serve on the board. In 2007, the Vietnamese American community raised $70,000 and donated to them. And through that fund, they were able to get a loan and had a memorial built. It was dedicated in June 2007. So this past June, we celebrated the 6th annual wreath-laying and anniversary.
Great. And so what is the mission of the foundation exactly?
To educate the public, to bring awareness about communism. Everybody talks about victims of Nazism, the German Nazis and stuff like that, but nobody talked about the victims of communism, even though there are millions still who are victims of communism in the world.
So can you tell me how many countries are participating in this foundation?
I don't have a number, a concrete number for you, but I know that all of the countries that were under communism in the Soviet bloc in Eastern Europe, they are all here from Asia. There's Vietnam, there's North Korea, a group of North Korea, Taiwan, a group of Taiwan, and the Falun Gong. But they participate, but I'm not sure that they consider themselves as members.
So do you know how many countries are currently under communism rule today still?
Well, I can count at least 4. There's China, there's Vietnam, there's North Korea, and there's Cuba.
So subsequently, how many victims of communism would you say there are? And how many of them are from which country, like Russia or China?
Well, according to the Black Book on Communism, they estimated about 100 million, but I think there are more than that. 100 million was like probably 20 years ago. But nowadays with Vietnam, with China, with North Korea as going on, well, consider the Vietnamese alone. Over 3 million people died. 3 million people were victims of communism, including us. The boat people, the refugees, we are all victims of communism.
So does your organization focus on any specific region?
No, we focus on all countries that was considered as captive nation under communism. We consider them, members of, it doesn't matter, which part of the world they're from.
And how does your organization obtain the data that you guys have? What methods do you use?
See, we could of the country to provide us with the data as to the victim, as to the day, what happened in the history and the whole 9 yards. And right now we're trying to use that kind of data that we have, the history, and work with the local government to introduce those kind of curriculum into the public school curriculum about communism.
So then how do you obtain data from countries that are still under communist watch, such as China, Vietnam?
Well, there are a couple of people who escaped from China, or just like the boat people like us. We tell them the story, we tell them what we went through, we tell them our experience, and that's how they collect the data, and that's what they use, to build the virtual museum or any information that they use in the curriculum.
So then do you see any difference in the way torturing or killing from one country to another when it comes to communism?
When you read through all of those history, they all the same. What Lenin imposed and what they taught, the Soviet taught, the Vietnamese communists, the Chinese communists, they use the same thing, at least the basic part, and then they add in whatever tactics they have to make it more painful for the people who dare to, rise up against them, or to control them from rising up.
So tell me about the Global Museum on Communism. I know that's a project that you guys are working on presently.
Yeah, because we wanted to have a museum, a concrete museum, just like the Holocaust Museum, but we don't have the funding yet. So we thought it's a good idea to build a virtual museum so people from all over the world can visit it. They don't have to be in Washington D.C., but they can still see what it's all about. That is just a temporary project while we do fundraising in order to build a concrete museum in Washington D.C. From what I learned a month ago, the Hungarian government dedicated $1 million to the foundation in order to use as seed money to find a way to build a museum on communism.
So who would you say your audience is, and how's the feedback been?
I think we want to educate the public, but most important, the younger generation to know what it's all about, why communism is, is a tragedy, for mankind. And what we want for them to learn is that communism is nothing but, misery for the people, for tragedy for the people, and that should be eradicated, from the history of mankind. And unless they know about history, unless they know what it's all about, otherwise they will repeat the same mistake, and we want them to understand that.
So for this monument, have there been any incidents of people targeting it, or people who do not like what the mission of the organization is?
A lot of people, you'll be surprised to hear that. I talked to a lot of people, young and old, and they were like, but I thought communism is a thing of the past. They thought the collapse of the Berlin Wall was the end of communism back then. They don't pay attention to the victim, as if they pay attention to the victim of Hitler, but they don't pay attention to us. So a lot of people that walk by and was like, well, why do we have this here? America never been a victim of communism. We have no experience, and that's why we see our mission is to educate the public, especially the younger generation, and that's our goal. Again, education. We educate people. There are still millions and millions of people who are victims of communism, and unless the public understand about that, they're still a threat, even for America.
So would you say there has to be any change? Would you say that communist governments have changed at all or progressed in your opinion?
No, they adjusted themselves enough in order to keep surviving, to keep holding on to power. But communism is communism. They will never change. What they love is power.
So what events does the Victims of Communism Foundation host?
We have fundraising event every year at the different embassy. These are the embassy of the Eastern Bloc that used to be under the Soviet bloc. So every year they throw out a fundraising event, a dinner. And also every June we have a dedication ceremony to commemorate the dedication of the monument. And so some 30 embassies and groups comes here to dedicate a wreath to memorialize the victims of communism.
That's great. So When did you first get involved, Anh Thư, and why did you decide to get involved?
I got involved by accident, but by default, more like that. And in 2003, when I learned about it, I cannot see why the Vietnamese American community cannot be a part of it, because we are still victims of communism. And I dedicated myself because I am a victim of communism, and I think the world still don't understand what we go through to survive, to be here today. And I wanted to be that voice, so that's why I get involved.
So are there any other things that you would want to share with us?
Yeah, I want the Vietnamese American from all over the country, all over the world, when they come to D.C., please come and visit this and dedicate a week to let people, I mean, a lot of cars and people passing by every day, they will notice and they will pay attention and they will wonder, what is this all about? Why are people still come here, to pay respect? And that's how we spread the word out, and that's how we educate people, so they learn more of what communism is all about. Then they can join us to make communism a thing of the past.
So how many victims of communism would you say there are? And how many of them are specifically in Russia, or China, Cuba, North Korea, or Yugoslavia?
And from the data that we gathered, now I don't have the exact number, it might be outdated too, but there were an estimate of 65 million victims from China, over 20 million from the Soviet, 2 to 3 million from Cambodia. Vietnam, right now they said about 1 million, but I would say more like 3.5 million. Eastern Bloc, about 65 million for them also. And also, like, if you, I don't know, what do you think about it, but I was surprised to learn that even Africa got 1.7 million people, and even in Afghanistan, 1.5 million people are victims of communism.
Thank you so much.